Life sure is good, isn't it? I mean, it is. Life is really good. When we get done here, I'm going to go home. I'm going to walk inside my nicely constructed home, my nice, safe home. It's never been shot at, as far as I know. Sure. I'm going to walk inside, and I'm going to flip a switch, and I'll have light just like that. I'm going to turn a dial, and I'm going to make it a little bit warmer in my house, just to where I think it's comfortable, and I don't have to think about it again. I probably won't open my refrigerator, but if I want to, I can open my refrigerator. A light will come on, illuminating all my well-preserved food. Sure. Little freezer up top, and I have a freezer in my basement. Don't have to worry about a thing. And it's been like that pretty much my whole life. Pretty much my whole life. This is a pretty recent development, probably only in the last century or so. Have we as human beings had these luxuries, these amenities? Life is good. Now, I do have an advantage over a lot of people, and I'm not bragging, I'm not talking about all y'all, but Americans in general, I do have an advantage because I can look at that in perspective because I have spent many an hour studying human history. All civilizations, all time periods. And I can tell you, we've got it really good. Yes, sir. We have it really good. Yes, sir. But sometimes history can prove things for us. For example, if we look at all the failed civilizations in history, what we find is there's a period of struggle, advancement, a period of prosperity, followed by a period of decline and destruction. Today, we can do more in less time than ever before. And just take a look at our country here. United States of America, we've done things humans only dreamed about. In the past, the steam engine was first invented in Great Britain, but it came here and it was fully realized, its full potential was realized here. We led the world in many technologies. First in flight, thousands of years ago, humans dreamed of flying. It was part of the mythology. And in America, we did it. We made it a reality. And now it's almost routine. I mean, a lot of people, you can ask people that did it recently, taking an airplane flight, it's kind of a hassle. What we find in past civilizations, and if we're going to be reasonable about it, it's happened so much in the past, we can almost expect it. Right. There's a decline in the morals of the people. There's a decline in government efficiency and honesty. Included is inevitably economic troubles before something happens that causes that civilization to fail. Now that can be various things. It can be outside invasion or internal, the country people tearing its country apart or whatever. But the point is the United States. Are we starting our period of decline? I think we can all agree our morals are in decline. I like to watch the news, but you can ask my wife about it. There's a lot of times where I just turn the TV off. I get so disgusted with it. Recently in the news, there's this Santos fella. He's a Republican. Oh, they're just tripping over themselves about this guy lied. And then this morning there was a talk show thing, and there's like, well, Biden, you ought to hear Biden lie. And they're going back and forth, and I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? The real story would be finding a politician that didn't lie. There's your story. Yes, sir. We have led the world in many technologies. You go to these other countries, and you'll find their architecture is similar to what was built in the United States and England. The materials they use are first used in the United States and England. The way their infrastructure is put together was first modeled in the United States and England. We landed men on the moon. I don't know if there's any conspiracy theorists in the room, but we did. Yep, and if they're going to be accurate, we're supposed to send folks to Mars next year, the Artemis program. Now, I predict that something will happen and they'll have to postpone that to in the future. I don't know if they'll be able to stick to their schedule, but that's in the plans. We developed nuclear power. But are we in decline? Now, this lesson today is about authority. And I'm going to come back to this at the end of the lesson. But there are many kinds of authority. You know, authority of parents over their children, authority of the husband and the wife, authority over the police or the sheriff department. There's all kinds of authority. There's all kinds of authority in the Bible. Ultimate authority, of course, comes from God. And having been doing a little study on it, authority is set up by God, whether it's good or bad. And authority can be bad. We're going to look at a couple of real bad examples coming out of the Bible and how people dealt with that. But God has a reason and plan for everything. You guys know that. Now, I just recently read the book here. The preacher's been talking about The Authority Principle by Rick Carter. I just finished it today, and it was very helpful to me. It was timely. I was looking into it, and he said, well, read this. And I did, and it was very helpful. So there it is. If anybody's interested, it's a pretty easy read, and it is a help. We are commanded by God to obey our government. But there's more to it than that. You can't just say, okay. No. Because as you know, as well as I do, the outward appearance is not what concerns God, it's what's in here. How do we say yes to authority or no? What's the spirit of that? Sure. That's what God is interested in. We're going to use just a couple of examples out of the Bible. There's a lot of examples of authority in the Bible, and I'll try to keep this one in the target time period. Please turn in your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. Preacher had us there not long ago. We are commanded by God to obey our government, but is there a time when we should not? Now, Jesus told us, regardless of anything, be on His side till death. And that sounds pretty extreme because it can be extreme. It's already been extreme in our lifetimes. You guys remember those black-clad fellas over in the Middle East that had executed them Christians? I mean, when the knife's at your throat, do you renounce Christ or do you keep your faith and your life ends? That's what it comes down to. It's happened in our lifetime. All right, we're looking at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 10 through 17. Which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, and a pilgrim is somebody on a religious journey, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. As free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men, period. Love the brotherhood, period. Fear God, period. Honor the king, period. Now, there's a set of instructions right there. And we are to not only obey authority, but we are to respect authority. And even if President Biden were standing right here and I disagreed with every single thing that came out of his mouth, God would still want me to say, yes, Mr. President, no, Mr. President. In other words, treating him with the respect because God put him there. And that extends to all areas of authority. And we do this for God's sake. Now, when it says love the brotherhood, if we look that up in Strong's Concordance, we'll see that that's a feeling of brotherliness, Christian fraternity. So when it says love the brotherhood, it's talking about Christians. And we do this for the Lord's sake. Just like the preacher was saying earlier, forgiving us for his own sake, for the Lord's sake, for God's sake. Now, the freedom spoken of here, when it talks about your freedom, your liberty, interesting, it's as Americans, because we are a little bit unique in this regard, and I'll get to more of that later. Now, when you look up the Greek of this, eleutheria, this is not freedom associated with salvation. And it's not freedom from sin it's talking about. It's freedom from being a slave to another person. It's your physical freedom on the earth to walk around and do what you will. That's the kind of freedom. So it's saying our freedom as Americans, your freedom to do what you want as an American in America, that is to be used according to these instructions. Honor the king. Till when? We are commanded to respect authority, but sometimes it is that very authority that commits the most horrific crimes against their own people. Now, this lesson is about that type of obedience that's commanded by God. But, of course, the answer to that's pretty easy. We'll look at a couple of examples. We obey that authority until it gets to the point of saying, coming in contrast to the authority of God, the instructions of God, the commandments and ordinances of God, which we try to write on our hearts and keep in our hearts. When that authority says to go against that, in conflict with that, then no, sorry, can't obey. But what's the spirit? What's the spirit of that disobedience? That's important to God. Just go to Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1. Now, we're back in ancient times here. Well over 3,000 years ago. We're in ancient Egypt. And we're going to start with verse 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah. Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Dan and Naphtali, and Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now, consider that verse for just a second. It almost seems like God's trying to tell us, you're not going to believe how abundant these people became. You're not going to believe how prosperous these people were in this time period, in this place. They were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, waxed exceeding mighty. Now that's going to have an influence on what we're going to read here next. Verse 8, now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, which means hardship. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. Whew, I'll get that. Shiphrah and Puah. Now, I looked up estimates of the number of the children of Israel that left Egypt. And there's some wild estimates, but one on the big side is over 2 million people walked out of Egypt. They were children of Israel. 2 midwives. And in case you don't know, a midwife is somebody who helps with childbirth. A woman who knows what she's doing, she helps with childbirth. Let's read on so that we get a little more context to this. And he said, we're talking about Pharaoh talking to the midwives, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. So Pharaoh's telling the Jewish midwives, when you go help these women give birth, if it's a male child, kill it. And that'll take care of our population problem. Yeah, see, they were doing this long before the Chinese. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Now, I am not an expert on childbirth. I think there's somebody in the room that might be. But I am not. Evidently, it involves a stool. Although it is true, I've been at the birth of both of my children. I was a bystander. Although the second time I did snip the umbilical cord. I don't think she felt it. But other than that, I really was more or less a bystander, and I never saw a stool anywhere. But anyway, let's get past that. Yeah. The women are lively. They said they give birth before we even get there. Now here's the thing, folks. Were they lying to Pharaoh? It would not surprise me if they were not lying, because I've been going through here and putting these lessons together for a while now, and one of the things I've found is that when God does something, He usually does it a lot better than we even imagine it can be done. So it would not surprise me if that was true. Would not surprise me one bit. But, okay, let's go verse 20, finish this out. Verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that He made them houses, which in translation gave them families. The Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Now that's some authority. When you can tell people under your as a ruler of the land. And Pharaoh owned the land. In the mentality of the ancient Egyptians, not the Hebrews, but the Egyptians, Pharaoh owned the land. Pharaoh was going to go on and be with the gods because he was a god on earth. And once Pharaoh died and they went through the elaborate mummification and all the rituals and magic spells and built the tombs and all that kind of hubbub, then in their minds, Pharaoh went on to join the gods. Same thing 2,000 years later with Roman emperors. They were doing the same kind of thing. But that he was the biggest human authority in the land. And he's telling these people, we need to be killing these babies. That tells me, well, there wasn't a lot of respect for human life right there. Right. Wasn't a lot of respect for human life. But that's all that says about the midwives. So even though we don't know whether they were telling a falsehood or not, and I suspect, my personal opinion, they were not, but they didn't say, no, and you're a lousy king for wanting us to do that. Right. You know, they answered the question. They disobeyed, but God doesn't tell us that they in any way insulted the Pharaoh or verbally opposed or attacked the Pharaoh or any other thing. They just didn't do it. And when they were questioned, they gave that answer. Now, whether you believe them or not is up to you, but I personally believe them. Did you know that there's been a Pharaoh in Egypt longer than there not has? The last Pharaoh of Egypt, well, Egypt was annexed by Rome in 30 BC. And at that point, there was no longer a Pharaoh that gave the orders in Egypt. It was the Roman emperor, or whoever was in charge back in Rome. That went back and forth quite a bit. But there has been a Pharaoh in Egypt longer than there has not been a Pharaoh in Egypt up to this point in history. That's kind of interesting. The Pharaoh was seen as the divine mediator between gods and man. His word was law. He not only had duties to rule his people, he owned the land, officiated over legal, political, religious spectrums of Egypt, even chose the site of new temples, probably well advised by some of his engineers. And it was believed by the Egyptians that the Pharaoh preserved the balance so that life could go on and Egypt could prosper. Now, I've stood up here before and said, in ancient times like that, before Rome, Egypt was seen as like the highest, most powerful civilization for a long time in that part of the world. A lot of records have survived in Egypt because of its climate. It's so dry there. If you look at a climate map of Egypt, there's desert. The whole thing's practically desert. And there's this green strip going right through it. That's the Nile River. And then you get to that fan shape up in the north into the Mediterranean, the delta of the Nile. The rest of it's desert. It's super dry there. They don't have snow. And what that means is it's a good climate for preservation of a lot of things that would normally, here, paper, you get a piece of paper and toss it in some sand, it's going to rain and disintegrate. But in Egypt, it might sit there for a real long time. There's thousands of year old papyrus that survive simply because it's so dry there. And my next message, I think, is going to be on God's Word, His written Word, how it got from the stone tablets to our Bible in our hands today, just like an overview of that. So I'll give you some more information about that later. All right, so let's see here. I need to turn my page. That's what I need to do. The midwives disobeyed Pharaoh, and God dealt well with them. Now, if our government ordered us to do something and we didn't do it, and that pleased God, I'm not saying God's going to buy you a house. But, but my opinion, and I think I'm right here, is that yes, we need to honor authority in our lives on its various levels, as long as it doesn't supersede the authority of God in our lives. And that's why it's so important to get His ordinances and His laws and write them in our heart to where we know them upside down, that we know the truth. Not only does that keeps us from having an excuse, but it protects us. It's how we protect ourselves against authority when it contradicts God's authority, and that's coming. It's coming. We are told very clearly it's coming. I've given a lot of thought to, I don't know, I haven't given it a lot of thought. I've given it some thought about the end times, because I'm going to have a message on that sometime. It's coming. But I'm still thinking, and I'm still gathering some scriptures and evidence. And I'm not going to stand up here and try to be a prophet or anything, or nothing like that. But I don't know. There's just some things that are very interesting to me when I look at some of these things. For example, the United States. We are different than other countries in so many ways. We are the richest, most powerful country, most prosperous country that's ever existed in human history. If you look materially speaking, And a lot of people agree that, when the end of the end times comes, when Jesus comes, takes His church, and we have those years of tribulation, there's going to end up being a one world government. Some power is going to have authority over the fourth part of the earth. And I'm thinking, well, how are they going to do that with Americans? I mean, well, first of all, a lot of people, we look back at the Revolutionary War and we think, oh boy, we got our freedom. We got our rights. We got it in writing. Well, we are a country born in rebellion, aren't we? We defied the authority over us, didn't we? But we've been so prosperous, it's like God's blessing us, but look how we were born. I looked up some numbers. There are about 82 million Americans that own firearms. 82 million that own firearms. In the United States, there's 121 firearms for every 100 people. And this is a statistic that's only a couple of years old. Now, wait a minute. 2023. I guess it's about 4 years old. 82 million Americans, 121 guns per 100 people in the United States. You know what the next closest is? The Falkland Islands. They have 62 guns per 100 people in the Falkland Islands. It's a little group of islands off the coast of Argentina. It's owned by Great Britain. They had a little war there in the 80s, I think. And below that is a bunch of smaller countries. In the top 10, the only other big country is Canada. It's 8th on the list. Wow. We are way above any other country when it comes to our citizenry and armed citizenry. What are they going to do about that? Now, of course, the government can try to take them. That's been trumpeted for quite a while now by politicians who want votes. But I don't know, that seems like the hard way to do it. They could cut off our ammunition, and I don't know how many of y'all have been try to buy ammo, but sometimes it's pretty difficult in the last couple of years. I usually go to Buckeyes to buy it, but Buckeyes is, they sell a lot of stuff, not just ammo. But before youth deer season, I called up a firearms store in Cape Girardeau. I think it was Shooters, where they specialize in ammo and guns. That's what they do. That's what they sell. I said, how much is y'all's 30-30 ammo? Well, we ain't got none. I wasn't necessarily disrespectful. I was not. I just questioned them. I said, why not? I said, why ain't you got this? It's the day before youth deer season. You ain't got no 30-30 ammo. Why not? That's your business. They didn't have an answer for me. But I tried to keep it respectful. My daughter got on me for being kind of hard on them. I don't know. It seems like it would be easier, and I'm just speculating here. It would be easier for them to say, well, it would be easier to try to convince us that we have to save the world, and the only way we can do that is to go take over these countries so our government can, convince the U.S. citizenry somehow to use their guns to help do that. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but armed Americans will have to be dealt with before this one world government comes to help. But, when you read Revelations, there's a whole lot going on there, and it sounds real scary. And talking about this knowledge of nuclear weapons, I mean, that's all over the place now. It's all around the world. Pakistan has it. India has it, and they're always shooting at each other. China, Russia, we, French, Israel probably. They've never admitted it, but they probably do. Iran's trying to get it. Evidently, one of these days somebody's going to push the button, probably. All right, let's go to Exodus chapter 2. We know we cannot confound God's will. He will enact it, usually better than we can imagine. I want to touch on this one more time before we leave and go somewhere else. Exodus chapter 2. I'm on verse 1. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. That must have been difficult to find no male babies, squalling and hollering. And when she could no longer hide him, 3 months, and that's before they can walk. They're probably crawling around pretty good. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. What I tell you about God? Not only was Moses raised by his mother got paid to do it by Pharaoh. God does things a lot better than we can come up with. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, please. Matthew chapter 2, verse number 1. Excuse me. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. And that preacher had us here a week ago, I think. Saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. All Jerusalem with him. These Hebrews knew the prophecies. They knew a Messiah was coming. But why would they be troubled if the wise men were saying, well, where is this king? We followed his star. We know he's around here somewhere. Shouldn't they have rejoiced? I mean, I understand Herod not doing it. We'll talk about him in a minute. All of Jerusalem with him? Why were they troubled? Weren't they looking for the Messiah? Verse 4, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Now, if you can see this in your mind's eye, here's Herod calling all the smartest guys he's got into him in one room and saying, okay, you're an expert on this, you're an expert on that, where is this happening? And they tell him it's Bethlehem. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, in other words, he got this information, and then he got the wise men in a different room, privily, privately. Called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. He wanted to know everything about this. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the young child. And when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. And now we know that he was lying to him. He didn't want to worship the child. He wanted to kill him. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. All right. Verse 11. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. They fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. Even the wise men did not discern the evil in Herod's heart. Now, Herod at this time was a title. It was because the rulership, the Herod rulership was a dynasty by this time. In other words, power was handed from father to son for at least 3 generations that we know of. And all 3 of the Herods had a bad reputation of killing folks. The grandfather of the Herod of Jesus' time actually was so bad that there's a quote from the first emperor of Rome about him. Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, and there's a quote, he says, it would be safer to be Herod's pig than his son. Now, we don't know who Herod sent, as far as if I read this correctly. Verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. We don't know if these were Roman soldiers or Jewish warriors, because Herod was not a Roman. Now, he was the king of the Jews, so to speak, of that time period in that place, even though his authority was underneath the Roman governor. Like Pontius Pilate later, there was a Roman governor there that was the mouthpiece, if you will, the authority of the Roman emperor. So we don't know who he sent. If it was Roman soldiers, not a problem. Roman soldiers were well trained to deal out death. They knew how to do it. But what if it wasn't? I mean, he was not a Roman commander. I don't know if Herod had the authority to send Roman troops. It may have been Jewish warriors or the house guard. Kings all had their own guardsmen. It was critically important these men were loyal to them, to the death. That was how they stayed alive, as evil as a lot of them were. But if they were Jewish house guard soldiers, how do you convince them to go kill the children of their own people? That's wicked. Is there a lesson in that? Yeah, there's a lesson in that. There's probably going to come a time when governments will tell their armies to go kill their own people, and they're going to do it. Like I said, I'm not standing up here trying to be a prophet. I'm just saying, I've seen it over and over again in history, and worse. There's things recorded that's just right out of nightmares that people have done in the past. I have read every ancient source about Alexander the Great. At one time, I was fascinated with the guy, and I read everything I could find about him. I wrote a paper on him one time, and I used nothing but ancient sources. And my professor got mad at me. He said, "Well, there's no modern sources here." And I said, "Yeah, I didn't want my paper to be tainted by modern sources. I just used the ancient sources, in my opinion." Well, I didn't get a very good grade on it, but one of Alexander the Great's favorite tactics, because he would march into an area. This is a guy that marched to war for 10 years. The longest time he ever spent in one spot was when he was laying siege to Tyre. It took him 6 months to do it. I think it was 6 months. But you couldn't stop this guy. He refused to be defeated, and ultimately was never defeated. The only thing that defeated him was sickness or poison, one. We don't know which one it was. But one of his favorite tactics, when he went into an area, he said, "You either submit to my authority or I'm going to kill you." And those that fought, he would defeat them. He would round up all the men and boys old enough to hold a weapon, and he'd kill them all. Every single one of them. Without anybody he caught, they killed them. And the women and children were given to his soldiers as slaves. Now what that means is that there were slavers, people whose business was slavery, and they would follow his army. And the soldiers, they got their own job to do. They can't be burdened with all these slaves. They would take these slaves and sell them to the slaver. And that's how he paid his soldiers. I know, that sounds harsh. That's harsh. Life must have been hard in ancient times, huh? But it's interesting that God sent word to the wise men, saying, no, don't go back to Herod, don't report to Herod, just go on home by another way. Even the wise men did not discern the evil in Herod's heart, but when God wants to send a message, he will send a message. Now there's a part, I don't think I wrote it down. It's in the New Testament where it says in the end times, in the last days, the young men will prophesy, the old men will dream dreams, and I can find several spots in here because I've been gathering that information for another lesson. We are in the last days, and I'm not saying I'm having any visions or anything. I'm not, but when God wants to send a message, he will, even if it's out of the mouth of a donkey. You guys remember Balaam? God wasn't pleased with Balaam. He started riding his donkey out of town, and the donkey wouldn't go a certain way because he saw the angel with the flaming sword. Balaam didn't see it, and he just beating on his old donkey there. "What are you doing, you ornery thing?" And finally God gives the donkey the power to speak. He says, "Why are you beating me? Haven't I taken you wherever you wanted to go? There's obviously a reason here." And God opens Balaam's eyes, and he sees the angel. He's like, falls on his face. I'm sure there's a lesson there, don't beat an ornery mule or whatever. I'm running out of time. I got to keep going. I got to skip the history part. So was life more dangerous back in those days? Was there less respect for human life in those days? It seems like it. When you've studied history like I have, I come across things like Alexander and his tactics, and I'm thinking, man, life did not have much value back then. But then I reflect on just the last 100 years. Last 150 years, let's do that. Things will get worse. Was life more dangerous back in those days? I submit that it was not. As easy as my life has been, and I mean my life has been easy. Sure, I've had hard times. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps, but I ain't got no complaints. I always had a warm bed and a hot meal if I wanted one. Well, when I was we had sea rations, and they weren't hot all the time, but I liked them. My favorite meal was spaghetti and meatballs in a can. You can ask my wife to this day. Every once in a while we go to Walmart, I'll grab Chef Boyardee spaghetti and meatballs in a can. I'll take it home, open it up, and eat it right out of the can. I like it. But, you know, it wasn't that long ago when in a matter of about 3 to 4 years, a small country exterminated over 6 million people. That wasn't that long ago. There's still people alive today that were alive when that happened. And we are not too far removed from those very people. I'm talking about Germany. You know, in the decade of the 1850s, 1 million Germans came over to the United States. Some of them went to St. Louis and spread down the Mississippi through this area. There's why so many Germans are out here. And millions of Germans came over here. There were, in fact, the government was a little bit worried. Roosevelt was a little bit worried about how many Germans were in the United States. I don't know if you know this. There was a Nazi party in America before 1939 when Hitler went into Poland. They had a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. You can get on YouTube and watch it or see the pictures of it. That was all those German immigrants coming over. That was about the same time evolution got widespread, along with eugenics, which was the real driving force behind the final solution. The final solution was Hitler's plan to eliminate the Jews. They called it the final solution. That was the real driving force behind all that. Evolutionists, scientists today don't want to discuss that. As believers, we must try our best to obey God and study His Word and pray to know His will in our lives. But what is coming? Are we prepared to disobey the King for God's sake? One of the greatest killers of humanity is abortion. Vladimir Lenin led the communist revolution of Russia in 1917, right in the middle of World War I. This was the first modern state to legalize induced abortion on command, or on demand. It was legal to induce abortion on demand. In the 20th century, China used state-enforced abortion, induced abortion to reduce the population, whether the mother wanted it or not. In the United States, since Roe versus Wade in 1973, according to the CDC, and other data collecting agencies, 1990 was the peak of abortions in the United States, 1.6 million. And it peaked during the 1980s and 1990s. If you look at a line graph, that's when it peaked. It was regularly over 1 million a year. And that's just the legal induced abortion. That's not counting any of the others. Today we have the day after pill. We have the Plan B pill. We've gotten very good at using language to make this sin acceptable. And you know, there's always, I don't know, I like the news, I like to know what's going on, but man, you just can't trust those folks. And not even Fox News. I take it with a grain of salt. They're probably not telling me the whole story, but it's hard to know what the truth is sometimes. Now, in this lesson, I focused more on infanticide rather than abortion, but maybe there's no difference in God's eyes. I don't know. We need to obey authority with humility. Even David, King David, he had a couple of chances to kill Saul when Saul was trying to kill him. Even one time, David was sleeping in a cave. Saul goes into the same cave and goes to sleep. David wakes up, but he did not raise his hand against Saul. Now, he cut a piece of garment from Saul's his clothing and took it with him, but he later repented of that. Even when Saul was trying to kill him. And he explains it, and he says, you know, I shouldn't raise my hand against God's anointed. Even when he knew that he was replacing him, and he knew that Saul was out of favor with God still, he respected that authority. Let's go to Revelation chapter 6, and this is where we'll end. Revelation chapter 6. This will bring it to a close. I think I'm approaching that target time period. If I'm not already there, I'll try to get this over quickly. Now we know that when Jesus comes back, He's coming to get His church. And those folks are going to be saved from the tribulation years, which are terrible. Those of you that read through there, I don't know about you, it looks an awful lot like nuclear war to me, but it may not be. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not going to be good. We just need to keep our faith up. You know, something, when I was reading this book here, it brings up something that was interesting, and I hadn't known that before. There's only two people that Jesus said they have great faith. Two people. And neither one of them were Jews. The first one was the centurion, the Roman centurion, that came to him and said, I'm a man with authority. You know, I tell a man to come, he comes. I tell him to go, he goes. You don't have to come, because Jesus said, I'll come to your house. He says, you don't have to. Just say that you have the authority, say the word. And it says Jesus marveled. And he called his apostles and said, I haven't seen this great of faith. Not even in Israel. And the other one was the Samaritan woman. Who he was saying, you're not Jewish, I'm here for the Jewish people. And she says, don't even the dogs eat crumbs from the master's table. And he said that woman had great faith. We keep that kind of faith, I think we're going to be good. All right, Revelation chapter 6. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. One of the four beasts saying, come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow. And a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. That sounds like war to me. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like war. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. We could interpret that as being economic failure. Moving on down to 7. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. It says, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth. And what is the fourth part of the earth? Anywhere from 3/4 to 2/3 of the surface of the earth is water. About 1/4 of the surface area is land. So, war on all lands? I'm done, preacher.